The greatest achievements of ancient civilizations were built on the backs of enslaved people. We admire the monuments but rarely consider the human lives hidden behind them. Slavery was not the same in every civilization. The experience varied greatly. Today, we will live one full day as a slave in 4 different ancient worlds. From state laborers in Egypt to household slaves in Greece, their realities were worlds apart. Our journey begins in ancient Egypt with Khepri, a temple-owned laborer. The day starts with the loud and aggressive shouts of the overseer. Khepri wakes instantly, knowing any delay will bring harsh punishment. There is no time to wash, only a short, hurried prayer to the gods. His only breakfast is dry bread and heavily diluted beer. He joins a long column of workers marching to the temple site. Their sacred duty is to build a magnificent temple for the god Amun-Ra. Today they must drag a giant granite block using only ropes and sledges. The ropes cut into their shoulders as they strain together in unison. The desert sun rises higher and the heat quickly becomes unbearable. Overseers constantly patrol, searching for any sign of weakness. A struggling worker is dragged aside and brutally beaten as a warning. Khepri lowers his gaze and pulls harder to avoid the whip. They begin the dangerous task of dragging the block up a long ramp. One mistake could send the stone crashing down and kill many men. By midday, his entire body is shaking from exhaustion and thirst. They are finally given a short break to drink from the Nile River. The break is only a few minutes before they are forced back to work. In the afternoon, they are ordered to make mud bricks in the scorching heat. Sharp stones hidden in the mud cut deeply into his feet. He carries the heavy wet bricks up the ramp again and again. The sun is now at its strongest, and there is no shade to be found. An older slave collapses from heat stroke right beside him. Khepri continues working in silence, too tired to show emotion. Finally, the sun begins to set, and the long workday comes to an end. They walk back to their small village of mud huts as night falls. The evening meal is bread, onions, and a small piece of dried fish. The men speak quietly about their families and lost freedom. Before sleep, Khepri offers a quiet prayer asking the gods for mercy. His body is completely broken after another day of endless labor. Yet somewhere deep inside, a small spark of hope still survives. Tomorrow, the same brutal cycle will begin long before sunrise. For Khepri and millions like him, this was simply what life meant. This was the daily reality behind the glory of ancient Egypt. Built with blood, sweat, and the broken bodies of men like Khepri, we now travel to classical Athens, the birthplace of democracy. Here lives Thalia, an educated domestic slave in a wealthy household. Her life is very different from the brutal labor of field slaves. Her first task is to fetch water from the public fountain before sunrise. The city is still quiet, but will soon awaken to the voices of free men. At the fountain, she waits patiently among other slaves and servants. She fills the heavy jars and carries them back balanced on her shoulder. Back at the house, she begins grinding barley for the family's breakfast. She prepares bread, olives, and porridge, while the household slowly wakes. Her master is a philosopher who frequently hosts intellectual gatherings. She serves wine while the men debate philosophy, politics, and freedom. The irony of hearing talks of liberty while being a slave is never lost on her. In the afternoon, she assists her mistress at the weaving loom. This is one of the few times she is allowed to speak with her owner. She is also trusted to teach the family's young daughter how to read. These rare moments of teaching give her a small sense of dignity. Later, she is sent to the crowded agora to buy food for the evening meal. She carefully selects fish, vegetables, and wine under strict supervision. Even surrounded by people, she is never allowed to walk alone. Upon returning, she prepares the main evening meal for the family. She is only allowed to eat after everyone else has finished their dinner. As darkness falls, she lights all the oil lamps throughout the house. Her final duty is to lock the heavy wooden doors and bar the gates. She locks the house from inside, becoming both servant and prisoner. In these quiet hours, she sometimes allows herself to dream of freedom. But such thoughts are dangerous and must be buried deep inside. She lies down on her thin mat in the corner of the courtyard. Tomorrow she will wake before dawn and repeat the same cycle again. Educated, useful, and trusted, yet still completely without freedom. This was the complex reality of domestic slavery in ancient Greece. For Thalia, freedom was a subject discussed daily, but never experienced. We now travel to the Roman Republic, an empire built on conquest and slave labor. Here we meet Brutus, a Celtic warrior captured in war, now a slave on a large farm. Roman law defined slaves as instrumentum vocale, a tool that speaks. The day begins with the sound of chains and the shouts of the overseer. The slaves are counted and marched out to the fields before sunrise. They are not allowed to speak to each other at any time. Brutus's job today is to plough the same field from dawn until dusk. The overseer, called Villicus, rides on horseback watching every movement. His whip is never idle. Even the smallest pause brings immediate punishment. There is no mercy, no exceptions, no hope of reward for hard work. By mid-morning, his bare hands are blistered and bleeding from the constant friction. The Italian sun beats down mercilessly, with no shade anywhere. A man collapses from heat exhaustion right in front of Brutus. Two slaves drag him away by the arms. Nobody will ever see him again. Brutus continues ploughing as if nothing happened at all. At midday, they are given exactly 30 minutes to eat. Their meal is 1 piece of bread and 1 cup of watered-down vinegar. Before they have finished eating, the overseer shouts and work resumes. The afternoon is exactly the same as the morning. Endless, repetitive labor. For a crime of running away, a slave is crucified beside the road. Every slave must walk past him on the way back to the barracks. This is the only reward for weakness or rebellion. As the sun finally sets, the long day of labor comes to an end. They are counted again, one by one, at the gate of the ergastulum. Once inside, the heavy iron gates are closed and locked from outside. For the next 12 hours, no one will come in or out alive. The evening meal is a thin bowl of barley porridge shared between 2 men. No one speaks. There is nothing left to say after another day. Brutus sits alone in a corner looking at the ground. He does not pray. He does not dream. He only waits. Tomorrow will be exactly the same as today, and the day after that. This will continue until he dies. There is no other possible outcome. This was slavery at its most absolute and most dehumanizing. Our final story takes us far east to the mighty Han dynasty of ancient China, one of the most powerful empires the world had ever seen. Here we meet Jian, a former Confucian scholar who was convicted of a political crime and stripped of everything, now reduced to a state slave. Unlike slaves in Rome or Greece, in China all slaves belonged directly to the emperor and were considered property of the imperial state. The work was organized with terrifying military precision, turning human beings into perfectly disciplined units of imperial labor. Every single day, Jian was forced to carry extremely heavy loads of rock and soil up dangerous mountain paths from sunrise until sunset. Imperial soldiers stood guard at every section of the worksite, enforcing absolute obedience with ruthless efficiency. Any worker who slowed down or showed signs of weakness was immediately and savagely beaten in front of the others as a warning. Before his conviction, Jian had been a respected scholar who studied classical texts and wrote poetry for the imperial court. Now he was nothing more than another anonymous body among the tens of thousands sent to build the emperor's ambitious projects. At midday, the slaves received a small, carefully measured ration of millet porridge to keep them alive, but never satisfied. They were given precisely 15 minutes to eat their meagre meal before being driven back to work by the soldiers. The afternoon labour on the steep, unstable mountain slopes was particularly dangerous and exhausting. A single mistake or moment of dizziness could send a man falling hundreds of meters to his death on the rocks below. When the sun finally began to set, the soldiers ordered the colonna of exhausted slaves to march back down to the labour camp. The labour camp itself was a cold, heavily guarded fortress filled with rows of overcrowded tents and wooden fences. Late at night, when the soldiers were less watchful, Jian secretly practiced calligraphy by writing characters with water on a flat stone. This secret calligraphy was the only remaining thread that still connected him to the educated and respected scholar he had once been. He knew that if any soldier discovered this small act of intellectual defiance, the punishment would be swift and brutal. Inside the overcrowded tents, hundreds of slaves slept packed tightly together on thin, dirty straw mats. Lying in the darkness, Jian often stayed awake thinking about the classical poems and philosophical texts he could no longer read or write. Each day blurred into the next in an endless cycle of back-breaking labour, hunger, and total exhaustion. Historians estimate that hundreds of thousands of men like Jian died during the construction of these massive imperial projects. Most of their bodies were simply buried where they fell, their names and stories erased forever from official history. Despite everything, Jian refused to allow his mind to become as enslaved as his body. In the deepest hours of the night, his thoughts remained the last truly free part of his existence. These small, hidden acts of intellectual resistance were all that remained of the man he used to be. For millions of state slaves, there was no hope of release, no path to freedom, only lifelong service to the emperor. Their blood, sweat, and broken bodies helped create one of the greatest and most enduring civilizations in human history. Yet this glory came at an unimaginable human cost that history rarely remembers. Jian understood that his individual suffering was just one small drop in an ocean of imperial ambition. Every morning, he woke up knowing the same exhausting cycle of labor and humiliation would begin again. And yet, through all this suffering, the human spirit still found ways to endure. This was the reality of state slavery under one of history's most powerful empires. Their stories, though largely forgotten, deserve to be remembered as part of humanity's complex past. Jian's silent struggle reminds us that even in the darkest conditions, the human desire for dignity never truly dies. 4 civilizations, 4 slaves, 4 completely different experiences of the same institution. Their stories remind us that behind every great empire was immense human suffering.